CEO Richard despairs over $100 million loss. It's impossible to fix this. The custodian, Julia, watches the screen in silence. In seconds, her fingers touch the keyboard. What appears on the screen freezes everyone forever. Before we start this story, tell me where you're watching from. Grab some coffee, get comfy on the couch, and don't forget to support us by hitting that like button. That way I know you enjoy this type of story. Ready? Let's begin. The alarm echoed through the halls of Tech Corp at 3 in the morning. On the executive floor, lights flickered on one by one as employees ran in a panic through the offices. CEO Richard Morgan was at the center of the storm, his face tense before a screen filled with endlessly flashing red code. "How much time do we have?" he asked the chief technology officer, who was sweating bullets next to the main desk. "If we don't solve this by 8 a.m., we lose the U.S. government contract. That's $100 million, Richard. The company won't survive this." The system that controlled the company's entire data infrastructure had collapsed. It was as if an invisible virus had invaded every line of code, causing a cascade of failures that no one could understand. The best programmers in the country were there, but after 4 hours of attempts, the problem was only getting worse. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Julia pushed her cleaning cart through the empty corridors. She had come in early today. She needed to finish her work in time to pick up her kids from the neighbor's house before they left for school. Her blue uniform was immaculate, as always, and her silent steps echoed softly on the waxed floor. She stopped in front of the conference room, where she usually found papers scattered after the executives' long days. But today was different. The lights were on, and agitated voices came from inside. Through the glass, she could see dozens of people running back and forth like desperate ants. "Mommy, are you coming home early today?" her 8-year-old son Peter had asked the night before. "I'll try, my love. Mommy always tries." Julia smiled sadly, remembering the promise. In the 5 years since she started working there, she had never missed a single day. It was the job that paid the bills, put food on the table, and ensured that Peter and Sophia would have a better future than hers. No one at the company knew her story. No one knew she had graduated with honors in systems engineering from a top state university. No one knew she had lost her dream job when she got pregnant and the children's father disappeared. No one knew she had sent her resume to hundreds of companies only to hit the same wall. "We don't have any positions for your profile at the moment." Her profile. A single mother, no corporate experience, no connections. The diploma on the wall of her small living room had become just a memory of what could have been. She began cleaning the desks near the conference room, trying not to listen to the tense conversations leaking through the ajar door. But it was impossible to ignore the desperation in their voices. "We've tried everything, a full reboot, system backups. We even called in outside consultants. Nothing works. The deadline is closing in. If we don't deliver the data by 8, we lose not only the contract, but our credibility. Other companies will cancel their partnerships. Maybe we should just accept that there's no solution." Julia stopped cleaning. Those words hit her like a punch to the gut. Accept that there's no solution. How many times had she heard that about her own life? How many times had people looked at her and decided there was no solution for a single mother with no connections? She discreetly approached the door and observed the screens through the small gaps. Code, graphs, numbers dancing in red. And then something familiar caught her eye. She knew that programming language. She knew it very well. Julia's heart raced as she recognized the pattern in the on-screen code. It was a system architecture she had studied extensively in college, a specific programming language that few truly mastered. Her eyes quickly scanned the lines of code appearing and disappearing on the monitors. "This isn't possible," muttered one of the programmers inside the room. "We've already checked that function 3 times. "Check it again!" Richard shouted, his voice thick with frustration. "We've been at this for 6 hours." Julia felt a tightness in her chest. She could see the problem. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there, as glaring as a dark stain on a white wall. A syntax error on line 847 of the main module, likely caused by an automatic update that had corrupted a critical function. She looked at her cleaning cart, then at the clock on the wall. It was 4:15 a.m. She still had 2 hours of work ahead of her and needed to be home by 7 to wake the kids. "Please, God," she whispered to herself, "don't let them lose this contract." She didn't know why she cared so much. Maybe it was because she had seen Richard kindly greet the doorman every morning for the past 5 years. Maybe it was because the company offered a decent health insurance plan, even for contracted staff like her. Or maybe it was simply because she couldn't watch people suffer when she knew she could help. She continued cleaning, trying to focus on her work, but her ears caught every word from the meeting. The outside consultants had arrived and couldn't find the flaw. The backup was corrupted. The restoration attempts were systematically failing. "Mr. Morgan," said a female voice she recognized as the HR director's, "perhaps it's time we consider the consequences. We need to start planning for mass layoffs." The silence that followed was deafening. Julia thought of Peter asking if she would be home early. She thought of Sophia, who had asked for new school supplies for her science project. She thought of her co-workers, Brenda from the cafeteria, John from security, Carla from reception, who also depended on this company to survive. She stopped cleaning and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She walked to the conference room door and knocked softly. The conversation stopped immediately. 20 pairs of eyes turned to her, some curious, others annoyed by the interruption. Julia felt her face flush, but she kept her posture straight. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know it's not my place, but I heard you talking about the problem with the system." Richard frowned. "Ma'am, Julia, I'm from the cleaning crew." A murmur of impatience rippled through the room. Someone whispered something about wasting time, but Richard raised a hand, calling for silence. "Go on, Julia." She took a deep breath. "I have a degree in systems engineering. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I could see the code on the screens from out here, and I think I know what the problem is." The silence returned to the room. This time, however, it wasn't one of despair. It was one of disbelief. "You mean to say, the CTO began, but Richard cut him off with a stern look. "What exactly did you see?" the CEO asked, stepping closer to her. "The error is on line 847 of the main module. There was a corruption in the validation function during the last automatic update. The system is trying to process data with a reference that no longer exists." The programmers looked at each other. It was a precise and specific technical explanation, too precise to be a guess. The room remained in absolute silence for several long seconds. Julia felt the weight of every gaze on her, as if she were under a microscope. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them steady at her sides. "How can you be so sure?" asked the head programmer, a man in his 40s named Frank, who had led the tech team for a decade. "Because I've dealt with this type of error before. During my undergraduate studies, we worked with this same system architecture on a simulation project. The behavior is identical, cascading failures that start with corrupted data validation." Richard moved closer, studying her face intently. "And you said you have a degree in what?" "Systems engineering. I graduated 8 years ago from a state university." "Then why are you working as a custodian?" Julia finished with a sad smile. "Because the job market is different for single mothers without connections. Because when you have 2 children to feed, you take the job you can get, not the one you deserve." A visible discomfort filled the room. Some executives looked down, clearly embarrassed. "Well," Richard said, breaking the silence, "if you can really fix this, I would be very grateful. Our experts have been at it for 6 hours. "May I take a look?" Frank hesitated. "Listen, no offense, but this is an extremely complex system. Someone without hands-on experience could cause irreversible damage." "Frank," Richard's voice was firm, "we've made 0 progress in 6 hours, and the deadline is in less than 4. What worse damage could we possibly have?" The head programmer sighed and gestured for Julia to approach the main workstation. She walked slowly, her nervousness growing with each step. It wasn't just $100 million on the line. It was proof that she hadn't wasted years of study. It was a chance to show that single mothers could also be valuable. Julia sat down at the computer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment. The screens displayed cascades of code, error graphs, and system logs that looked like hieroglyphics to most people in the room. To her, it was like reading a book. "Can you give me access to the code editor?" she asked. Frank typed in his password and authorized her access. "You have 15 minutes before I take over again." Julia nodded and began navigating the files. Her hands moved with a fluidity that surprised everyone. She opened windows, checked logs, and analyzed structures with the precision of someone who was born to do this. "Here," she said after 5 minutes, pointing to a specific section of the code. "Look at this function. It was automatically modified during the update at 11:47 p.m. last night." "How do you know the exact time?" one of the outside consultants asked. "It's right here in the system timestamp. The update changed the validation parameters, but didn't update the corresponding references in the processing module. It's like trying to open a door with a key that's been changed. The system can't complete the operation." Frank leaned over the screen. "But we checked these lines." "You checked the syntax, which is correct. The problem isn't what's written, but what's no longer there." Julia pointed to a seemingly normal line. "This reference points to a library that was removed during the update. The code compiles perfectly, but it fails at runtime." The murmurs in the room began to change in tone, from skepticism to something approaching respect. "And how would we fix this?" Richard asked. Julia was already typing. "We need to either restore the original reference or create a new one that's compatible with the updated version. The first option is faster, but riskier. The second is safer, but takes more time." "How much time for the second option?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. Richard glanced at the clock. 5:15 a.m. "Do it the safe way. Better to be late than never." Julia took a deep breath and began to type. In the room, 20 of the company's most powerful people watched her in absolute silence. A custodian was about to save a tech empire. Julia's fingers danced across the keyboard with a speed and precision that mesmerized everyone in the room. Lines of code appeared and were modified on the screen in a perfect logical sequence. She didn't just know what she was doing. She had complete mastery over this digital universe. "Incredible," murmured one of the outside consultants. "She's rewriting the entire validation function from scratch." "In 15 minutes, added Frank, who had positioned himself behind her to watch every move. "That would take me at least 2 hours." Richard remained standing by the desk, his gaze shifting between Julia and the clock on the wall. 5:30 a.m. 2.5 hours to save the company. "Done," Julia said, leaning back slightly from the screen. "Now I need to test the new function before implementing it in the main system. Can I use a sandbox environment?" "Of course." Frank quickly set up an isolated test environment. "You can run as many tests as you want." As Julia ran the tests, a whispered conversation started among the executives at the back of the room. How does someone with this level of skill end up working as a custodian? Asked the HR director. Maybe we should review our recruitment process, another director replied. How much talent have we overlooked? Julia heard the comments, but kept her focus on the screens. The first test ran successfully, the second too. On the third, a minor glitch appeared. There's a small conflict with the security module, she said, frowning. Nothing serious, but I need to adjust the integration. 5 more minutes of intense work. Julia corrected the conflict and ran a new battery of tests. This time, all the results were perfect. It's ready, she announced. The function is stable and compatible with all existing modules. Are you sure? Frank asked. Positive. You can implement it in the main system. Richard approached. Julia, do you realize what's at stake here? If something goes wrong, it won't go wrong. Her voice was calm and confident. I'd bet my career on it. You don't have a career, Frank said, not maliciously, but simply stating a fact. Not yet, she replied with a faint smile. Richard made a decision. Implement the fix. Frank hesitated for a moment, then typed the necessary commands. The main screen, which had been displaying red code for hours, began to flash. First yellow, then orange, then green. One by one, all the systems returned to normal. The cascading failures ceased. The error indicators vanished. The system controlling $100 million was working perfectly again. The room erupted in applause. Julia remained seated, staring at the green numbers on the screen as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks. Ma'am, Richard said, approaching her, you just saved our company. I just did what any engineer would do, she replied, quickly drying her eyes. No, you did much more than that. Richard turned to the entire room. Everyone, I'd like you to officially meet Julia. I'm sorry, what's your last name? Evans, Julia Evans. Julia Evans, the woman who saved us tonight. More applause echoed through the room. Julia stood up, still a bit shy, but with a new dignity shining in her eyes. Julia, Richard continued, we need to talk, seriously. She glanced at the clock. 6:15 a.m. She still had 45 minutes before she needed to go home and wake the kids. Of course, she said. But first, can I finish my work? I still need to clean this floor. Richard smiled. I think we can find someone else to handle that today. It was the first time in 5 years anyone had said that to her. Richard led Julia to his private office, a spacious room with large windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The sun was beginning to rise on the horizon, painting the sky in golden hues that reflected off the surrounding buildings. Please, have a seat, he said, gesturing to one of the leather armchairs in front of his desk. Coffee? Water? Coffee would be great, Julia replied, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. Richard poured 2 cups of a specialty coffee he kept in his office and sat across from her. For a moment, they just looked at each other in silence. Julia, he finally began, I need to understand your story. A person with your skills shouldn't be working as a custodian, not because there's anything wrong with the profession, but because you clearly have abilities that could be put to much better use. She smiled sadly and took a sip of the coffee. It was the best she'd tasted in years. It's a long and not very interesting story. I have time. And after what happened tonight, I can assure you it's very interesting. Julia took a deep breath and began to tell him. She talked about college, about her dreams of working in tech, about the unexpected pregnancy and being left by her boyfriend. She told him about the hundreds of resumes she'd sent, the interviews where she was dismissed before she could even demonstrate her skills, and how she eventually had to take any job she could find. When Peter was born, I was 24 with an engineering degree. When Sophia came along 2 years later, I was 26 and cleaning offices. Not that there's any shame in that, she added quickly. Honest work is always honorable, but it hurts when you know you could be contributing more. Richard listened intently, asking pointed questions that showed he was genuinely interested in understanding her journey. And why didn't you try to get back into the field when the kids were a little older? I tried, but the tech market moves so fast. After a few years out, companies see you as outdated. Besides, I needed a schedule that would let me take care of my kids. The night shift for cleaning was perfect for that. And how did you keep your skills current? Julia smiled for the first time since entering the office. I studied in the early morning hours after I finished work. I took free online courses. I read technical documentation. Peter and Sophia thought I was just surfing the internet for fun, but I was actually trying not to lose touch with my field. Richard leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. Julia, what you did tonight was exceptional, not just technically but morally. You saw a problem, you knew the solution, and you chose to help even though you had no obligation to. It was the right thing to do. It was. But not everyone would have made the same choice. He stood up and walked to the window. I have a proposal for you. Julia's heart sped up. What kind of proposal? We want to offer you a position on our systems development team, a salary commensurate with your skills, full benefits, and flexible hours so you can take care of your children. She was silent for a long moment, the words echoing in her mind like a distant dream. Are you serious? She finally asked. Completely. Julia, you didn't just solve a problem our best experts couldn't. You showed initiative, exceptional technical skill, and above all, character. Those are exactly the qualities we look for. Tears began to stream down her face, tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. Do I need to think about it? Richard laughed. Of course you do. This is a big decision, but I want you to know the offer is real, and I'm eagerly awaiting your answer. Julia stood up, still a bit dizzy from the proposal. Can I give you an answer tomorrow? You can give me an answer whenever you feel comfortable. But please, don't take too long. Our company needs people like you. It was 7 in the morning. At home, Peter and Sophia would be waking up for another school day, with no idea that their lives were about to change forever. Julia left the company with light steps, as if she were walking on clouds. The blue uniform she had worn for 5 years suddenly felt different, no longer a symbol of limitation, but a reminder of the path she had traveled to get here. During the bus ride home, she could barely contain her excitement. The conversation with Richard echoed in her mind like a melody she couldn't forget. A real job offer, in her field, with a decent salary and flexible hours. When she opened the door to her small apartment, she found Peter in the kitchen, trying to make breakfast for Sophia, who was still in her pajamas, watching cartoons on TV. "Mom!" Peter shouted, running to hug her. "You're home early." "I am, my love," she said, kissing her son's forehead. "How are you two?" "I'm trying to make toast, but I don't know if I'm doing it right," Peter replied, proud of his independence. Julia looked at the kitchen. Breadcrumbs scattered across the counter, an open jar of jelly melting butter, an adorable mess made with the best of intentions. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are the best kids in the world." Sophia approached, still sleepy. "Mom, why are you crying?" Julia hadn't realized tears were rolling down her face again. She knelt to be at their level. "I'm crying because I'm happy, my princess." "Did something good happen at work?" asked Peter, always the more observant of the two. Julia hesitated. How could she explain to an 8- and 6-year-old that their entire family's life might be about to change? How could she talk about opportunities and dreams coming true without creating expectations that might not pan out? "Maybe," she said finally. "Mommy had a very special night at work. I was able to help some important people solve a very difficult problem." "What kind of problem?" Sophia asked. "A computer problem. Remember how Mommy studied to work with computers before you were born?" The children nodded. "Well, I was able to use what I learned to help." Peter frowned thoughtfully. "Does that mean you can go back to working with real computers?" The question hit Julia like a perfectly aimed arrow. Peter had always been too smart for his age, picking up on nuances that many adults missed. "It might, my love. It just might." She made the kids breakfast, helped them get ready for school, and walked them to the bus stop. The entire time her mind was racing, weighing the pros and cons of Richard's offer. The salary would be 3 times what she was making. Flexible hours meant more time with her kids. An intellectually challenging job meant returning to her true passion, but there were risks too. What if she couldn't keep up after so many years away? What if her colleagues didn't respect her because of her past as a custodian? What if it was just an impulsive offer from Richard, made in the heat of gratitude? After the kids left for school, Julia sat in her small living room and looked at the dusty diploma on the wall. 8 years ago, when she received it, she thought the world was at her feet. Reality had proven to be much more complex. She picked up her phone and dialed her mother. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important." "Did something happen, honey? Your voice sounds different." "Something did. Something very good, I think." For half an hour, Julia told her mother the whole story, from the crisis at the company to the job offer. Her mother listened in silence, asking a few questions and expressing the kind of pride only a mother can. "Julia," her mother said at the end of the conversation, "you know what my advice is, don't you?" "I know, Mom. Take it. You deserve this opportunity. You always have. What if it goes wrong? And what if it goes right? Honey, you spent 5 years cleaning offices, not because it was your dream, but because it was necessary. Now you have a chance to go back to where you always wanted to be. Don't let fear steal your future." Julia hung up the phone and looked at the diploma again. It was time to take it off the wall and put it in a new frame. The next day, Julia arrived at Tech Corp an hour earlier than usual. She had an answer for Richard, but she also wanted to talk to a few people first. First, she found Brenda in the cafeteria, a woman in her 50s who had worked there longer than any other contract employee. "Brenda, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course. Sweetie, you look different today. Did something happen?" Julia told her a condensed version of the previous night's events. Brenda listened, her eyes growing wider and wider. "You saved the company? Our Julia? The same one who helps me carry the heavy boxes every week?" "The very same," Julia laughed. "And now they've offered me a real job in the tech department." Brenda hugged her tightly. "Honey, that's a miracle from God." "I'm nervous, Brenda. What if I can't do it? What if it's too different from cleaning offices?" "Julia, I've watched you for 5 years. You're the smartest person I've ever met. I always knew you weren't going to stay here forever. You were born for bigger things. I'm going to miss you guys, and we'll miss you. But missing someone is the price we pay for their happiness." Next, Julia sought out John from security. "John, you've been here for 15 years. What are the office employees like? Do they treat people who aren't on their level well?" John thought for a moment. "Look, Julia, I'll be honest. You get all kinds, like anywhere. But the tech people are different. They respect competence above all else. If you can do your job well, they'll respect you." "And Richard? What's it like working directly for him?" "Best boss I've ever seen. Demanding but fair. And from what I've been hearing through the grapevine this morning, you've become a legend around here." Julia frowned. "What do you mean?" "The story has already spread throughout the whole company. The custodian who saved $100 million. Everyone's talking about it. Julia's heart pounded. She hadn't thought about that. The attention, the comments, the curious stares. John, are people saying good things or bad things? Mostly good. Very good. But there are a few who are bothered that a simple custodian managed to solve what the experts couldn't. It bruises some egos. Julia nodded. That's what she had figured. At 9 o'clock, she knocked on Richard's door. "Come in. Julia, I was waiting for you. How are you feeling?" Nervous, anxious, hopeful, all at the same time. Richard laughed. "Normal feelings when facing a big change. What's your decision?" "I accept the offer." "Excellent." Richard stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome to the TechCorp team as a systems engineer." Julia shook his hand, feeling the magnitude of the moment. "But I have a few conditions," she said. "Of course. What are they?" "First, I want to keep greeting Brenda, John, and all the contracted staff. They're my friends, and I don't want that to change." "Done." "Second, if I can't keep up or if I cause problems for the team, I want you to fire me without hesitation. I don't want special treatment because of what happened." "Julia, you're underestimating yourself." "Maybe, but it's important for me to know that I'm there on merit, not because of gratitude." "Understood. Any other conditions?" Julia smiled. "Can I start on Monday? I need a few days to get organized and explain to my kids that our lives have changed." "Of course." "And Julia?" "Yes?" "Thank you for taking the initiative that night, for helping, for showing us that talent can be found in the most unexpected places." It was officially the first day of a new life. Julia's first week as a systems engineer was a roller coaster of emotions. Frank, who had initially been skeptical, became her biggest ally, introducing her to the team and explaining complex systems with surprising patience. "Julia," he said during a meeting on Wednesday, "I want you to know your work this first week has been flawless. You've adapted faster than any new hire I've ever seen." The development team was made up of 12 people, mostly men between 25 and 40. Initially, some showed quiet skepticism. Conversations that stopped when she approached, appraising glances, informal knowledge tests disguised as casual conversation. But Julia responded in the only way she knew how, with hard work and competence. On her first assigned project, optimizing a backup system, she not only met the deadline, but also introduced improvements no one had considered. On the second project, her suggestions reduced processing time by 20%. "How did you come up with that solution?" asked Sandra, one of the few women on the team, during lunch on Friday. "I don't know," Julia answered honestly. "Maybe it's because I see problems from a different perspective. 5 years of cleaning offices taught me to observe systems from an angle you've never had." "What kind of angle?" "You all see code. I see code, but I also see how people interact with it. You think about technical efficiency. I think about technical and human efficiency." Sandra nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. And how are your kids handling the change?" Julia smiled. "Peter is so proud. He tells everyone at school that his mom works with computers. Sophia doesn't fully understand yet, but she loves that I get home earlier. It must be a financial relief too. It's surreal. For the first time in years, I don't have to calculate every purchase at the grocery store. Yesterday, I took the kids out to dinner just because we felt like it. It feels like a dream." In her second week, Julia faced her first real challenge. An important client had reported intermittent failures in a critical system, but no one could reproduce the problem. "We've tried everything," said Carl, a senior programmer. "The system works perfectly in our tests." "Can I speak directly with the client?" Julia asked. "Speak with them. Why?" "To understand exactly how they use the system. Sometimes the problem isn't in the code, but in the way people interact with it." 3 days later, Julia had identified the problem. The client was using a specific combination of functions that created a conflict only under certain circumstances. It was a bug that had existed for months, but only manifested in very specific situations. "Brilliant," Richard said when she presented the solution. "How did you think to investigate the user's behavior?" "Because for years I was the user of systems that other people programmed. I know how frustrating it is when something doesn't work and nobody believes you." It was in that moment that Richard realized he had done more than just hire a competent engineer. He had discovered a unique perspective the company had never had. "Julia," he said after the meeting, "I have a different kind of proposal for you." "Different how?" "What if you led a special project? An initiative to review our systems from a user experience standpoint. You would be responsible for identifying and fixing problems that our conventional tests don't catch." Julia felt her heart race. Would that mean leading a team? A small one at first, maybe 3 people, but with the potential to grow if the results are good. "Richard, it's been less than a month since I was a custodian. Are you sure I'm ready to lead?" "Julia, leadership isn't about time served or diplomas on a wall. It's about vision, competence, and the ability to inspire others. You have all 3. She took a deep breath. Once again, life was presenting her with a door that seemed impossible to walk through, and once again she decided she was ready to try. 6 months later, the integrated user experience team led by Julia had become one of the most respected at TechCorp. What started with 3 people grew to 8, and their projects were being requested by clients all over Latin America. "Mommy's a boss now," Peter announced to his teacher, too proud to contain himself. "And she has her own office," added Sophia, who had visited the office the week before during a special family day for employees. Julia had kept her promise to greet all the contracted staff daily. Brenda from the cafeteria and John from security became her biggest fans, celebrating each promotion as if it were their own. "Remember when you told me you didn't know if you could keep up?" Frank asked during a coffee break. "Today, you're 3 steps ahead of all of us." "I still surprise myself every day," Julia admitted. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all an elaborate dream." "And how are your kids dealing with all these changes?" Julia smiled. "Peter wants to study programming. Sophia says she's going to be a computer boss, just like her mum. We moved into a bigger apartment last month. They have their own rooms now." But the most significant moment came on a Thursday afternoon when Richard called her in for an urgent meeting. "Julia, do you remember the telecommunications company in Mexico that was facing problems similar to what we had here?" "I remember. System collapse, losses in the millions. They want to hire our team to go to Mexico and solve the problem. Specifically, they want you." Julia's heart leaped. "Me? Why?" "Because the story got out. The custodian who saved 100 million has become a legend in the Latin American tech industry. Your name is being associated with innovative solutions and unique perspectives. Richard, I've never traveled outside the country. I've never managed an international project. And I'd never promoted a custodian to team lead in one day. Sometimes we have to trust our ability to grow as opportunities arise." Julia was silent for a moment, processing the magnitude of the proposal. How many days would the trip be? 2 weeks. You'd take 3 people from your team. International consulting fees. Julia, we're talking about a $2 million contract. She thought of Peter and Sophia. 2 weeks away from them would be hard, but the impact on their family's life would be transformative. "Can I give you an answer tomorrow?" "Of course, but I want you to know that I have complete faith in you. If you accept, it will be the first time our company has led an international project of this scale." That night, Julia had a long talk with her children. Peter, always mature for his age, got straight to the point. "Mom, Is this trip important for your job? Very important, my love. Then you should go. We'll be fine with Grandma. Sophia, now 7, was equally surprising. Mommy, are you going to help people in another country like you helped the people here? Yes, Princess, that's exactly it. Then you have to go. You're good at helping. The next day, Julia accepted the project. The trip to Mexico was an absolute success. The problem, which local engineers had been trying to solve for months, was identified and fixed in 1 week. The second week was spent on training and implementing additional improvements. Ms. Evans, said the CEO of the Mexican company during the closing ceremony, you and your team not only saved our system, but you taught us a new way to approach complex problems. When she returned to the US, Julia found a surprise waiting on her desk. An offer to become the regional director of tech solutions for TechCorp. Director, she asked in disbelief. Director, Richard confirmed. With your own division, project budget, and the autonomy to develop innovative solutions for all of Latin America. Julia looked out the window of her office. Yes, she had her own office now, and saw Brenda from the cafeteria waving from the courtyard below. 5 years ago, she used to clean those windows. Today, she was managing projects from the other side of them. Life, she discovered, had a way of surprising those who were willing to surprise it back. 2 years had passed since that early morning that changed everything. Julia, now 35, stood on the main stage of the biggest tech conference in Latin America, being introduced as the keynote speaker. Please welcome the Director of Innovative Solutions at TechCorp, Julia Evans, who will be speaking to us about human perspectives in technological systems. She walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone who had learned that competence and courage were enough to overcome any prejudice. In the audience, she recognized familiar faces: Richard, Frank, Sandra, and her entire team. In the front row, Peter and Sophia watched her with radiant pride. 3 years ago, she began, I was a custodian who cleaned offices in the middle of the night. Today, I lead a team that develops tech solutions for companies in 12 countries. I'm not here to talk about my story to brag, but to remind you of something fundamental. Talent doesn't wear a uniform. Competence has no social class, and innovation can come from the most unexpected places. The audience listened in absolute silence. When I solved that first problem at TechCorp, I didn't do it expecting a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and that is perhaps the most important lesson I can share. Opportunities appear for those who are prepared to act when needed. She spoke for 40 minutes about human-centric systems, about how technology should serve people and not the other way around, and about the importance of diversity in development teams. When she finished, she received a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. After the speech, a young woman approached her. She was wearing the uniform of a cleaning company and carrying a worn-out backpack. Ms. Evans, my name is Carla. I work cleaning the offices where the conference is held. I studied nursing, but, well, life happened. Julia smiled with understanding. I understand completely, Carla. How can I help you? I wanted to know if you think there's still a chance for people like us. Carla, I can tell you one thing for sure. There is always a chance for people like us. The secret isn't waiting for someone to recognize your value. It's being ready to show that value when the opportunity appears. She took out a business card and wrote something on the back. This is my personal number. If you need help, guidance, or just someone to talk to, please reach out. We women need to support each other. Carla left with tears in her eyes and renewed hope. That night, during the conference's closing dinner, Richard made a special toast. 3 years ago, TechCorp nearly lost $100 million due to a failure our best experts couldn't solve. A custodian saved our company. Today, that same woman is internationally recognized as one of the leading innovators in human-centric technology. Julia, you didn't just change your life. You changed how our entire industry sees talent and potential. Applause echoed through the hall. Peter, now 11, walked up to her. "Mom, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, my love." "Do you regret having been a custodian?" The question surprised her. "Why do you ask?" "Because some people at the conference talked about it like it was a bad thing." Julia knelt to be at her son's level. "Peter, being a custodian taught me discipline, humility, and the value of honest work. It taught me to observe without being seen, to understand how things really work. If I hadn't been a custodian, I never would have had the perspective needed to solve that first problem." "So it was a good thing?" "It was essential. Every experience in our lives, good or hard, prepares us for what comes next." Sophia, now 9, joined the conversation. "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to help people just like you." "How do you want to help?" "I don't know yet, but I want sad people to become happy, just like you did." 3 months later, Julia launched the Invisible Talents program at TechCorp, an initiative to identify and develop skills in contracted employees from all departments. The program became a model for other companies across Latin America. Brenda from the cafeteria was the first person to sign up. At 55, she discovered she had a natural talent for data analysis. John from security revealed an impressive knowledge of network systems. Carla, the young woman from the conference, was hired to lead a health tech project, and Julia continued to clean one office every day, her own office. Not because she had to, but to remember where she came from, and to never forget that cleaning and organizing, whether it be offices or code, were equally worthy ways of taking care of the world. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to believe that it's never too late to start over. And you, what moment in your life prepared you for something greater? Tell us in the comments below.